So again, my name is Dennis Simmons. I'm a partner sales executive, and I focus in the East region, in the Mid-Atlantic region specifically, as a Microsoft partner sales exec. On the line with me also is Matt Hester from our Central region for our SMB, and he is a partner technology strategist. And both of us will be hosting today's office hours call. It's a series of calls that we're offering to our SMB folks around our cloud solution. So I want to give you an update on what we're seeing out in the SMB market space right now. Cloud is obviously a huge topic with our SMB customers. I'm sure you're well aware of that as a Microsoft partner. But more concretely, a third-party outside group, IMA, did research over the last few years, and they found in 2014, across a $45 billion SMB marketplace, our SMB customers, 27% of them have moved towards some type of a cloud solution. And this trend is rapidly increasing and will continue to be an opportunity for partners as the SMB market space kind of swells up to $57 billion. We're going to see 37% of the marketplace moving to some form of a cloud solution. And even more interestingly, we're seeing that as folks kind of progressively move to the cloud, they're actually wanting to a hybrid type of environment. 69% of our SMB customers in the IMA research that they want to move to the cloud, but also have some of their solutions in an on-premises server-based type of environment, and then move some of their workloads up into the cloud as it makes sense for them, and as the business needs kind of warrant them moving up into the cloud. So the hybrid opportunity is certainly in the marketplace, and the cloud opportunity is certainly in the marketplace. So really the big question for you as a Microsoft partner, are you the one driving these conversations and guiding your customers to both the cloud and hybrid as appropriate? There's a very compelling event that's going on in the market, is our Windows Server end-of-life support. I'm sure most of you are aware of this. July 14th, 2015, in less than 100 days from now, we'll have end-of-life support for Windows Server 2003. I know a lot of partners are focused on this, and if you haven't had these conversations about upgrading these environments, the time is ticking, and we really need to get out ahead and have these conversations, because typical migrations can be anywhere from 20 days all the way up to 300 days. So this is a very opportunity for partners, and there's still a very large base of servers out, and particularly SMB. 35% of all the Windows Server, we estimate 8 million Windows Server instances are still out in the marketplace. About 35% of those are in the SMB markets. We're seeing partners, this is a great opportunity to engage with your customer and talk to them really about three different options, about upgrading their on-premise Windows Server up to a more current Windows Server 2003 R2, or maybe setting up a hybrid, which we find is the most common migration path for most of our SMB customers. So having those on-premise servers, then leveraging the cloud, whether it be Office 365 or leveraging Azure to start moving some of that infrastructure up into the cloud, or kind of the third option is moving everything up into the cloud with Azure and Office 365 and other third-party applications. But this Windows Server end-of-life support is also, we have SQL Server 2005 end-of-life support taking place April 12th, 2016. So really, this is a great time to have an overall infrastructure upgrade or infrastructure assessment type of conversation with your end customers. I see a lot of partners actually offering free infrastructure assessments. It's a great way to kind of talk about what your customers' infrastructure look like, versions of Exchange, and put together a plan to upgrade that environment regardless of the current platform they're on, and look at the cloud as a way to set up either a hybrid or move everything to the cloud. So one great way that you can profile your existing customer base is leveraging the customer talk workbook. Hopefully your PSC or your TPAM that you might be working with has synced up with you around that customer talk workbook that will enable you to get an actual report on your existing customer base if you currently have open volume licensing customers, and be able to enable you to target specific customers that still might have older versions of software. So happy to point you towards that if you have questions about that. So, looking at that upgrading on, the on-premise and moving to Windows Server 2012 R2, I'm going to turn it over to Matt to talk about some of the great features currently on that platform.
All right, thank you so much, Dennis. Good morning, everybody. Matt. Good afternoon or good evening. Yep. Welcome. And Dennis kind of keyed up kind of the business and what's going on. Now, we're going to focus on Azure here in a second. But fact of the matter, when you look at your servers from a migration perspective, there may be some workloads that you just can't move to the cloud. It may not make sense. So then what do you do with those if they're on your end of servers? Well, 2012 R2 has really grown up quite a bit. So you definitely want to take a look at a lot of the different things that are there and available for you, from the backend recovery. Storage has become a first-class citizen. Hyper-V is dramatically improved there to the fact that it's really into the market in a big way than it has been in past areas. Hybrid applications, if you are going to do things with cloud and have part of the solution on-prem and part of the solution up in Azure or Office 365, Windows Server 2012 R2, specifically R2 Essentials, is built for 365 and built with that in mind. So we're going to see a lot of opportunities for you. And notice what I said there. I said workloads, because when you look at servers, there might be a lot of lift and shift migrations where you want to bring all those people in and bring that full server up into the cloud, but chances are it might be just this workload. Maybe it's a website or maybe it's a database, and those different types of things that you want to actually bring up into the cloud for you to use. Remember, take a look at those individual workloads, and then it's a matter of bringing through the different kind of solutions that we have. Now I'm going to build this slide out, and hopefully most of you have seen this and probably even talked to your customers with this slide before about the different types of cloud computing models that are out there. We have on-premises, which is where everything's on, that's kind of sometimes called a private cloud, but that means everything's on-prem, but you own it all. It's basically a capital expense. But when you start looking at infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service, that's when you start moving into some of that OpEx capabilities of what you have to do. And really, the differences between the different cloud models is what do you have to manage for that. If it's SaaS, you can definitely look at Office 365, but there's also a lot of SaaS fun applications like Xbox Live, PlayStation's Play Network, iTunes, Xbox Music. Those are all great SaaS types of solutions where you only have to manage those data and access that is there. But you also have the ability to manage platform as a service. And what that is that's the ability to actually work with the data and applications where you're writing those workloads on top of the environments that are there. And the great thing about PaaS is it gives you a flexibility to take some of those custom apps that your customers may have put on-prem and move them into a cloud in a highly scalable way. And then we have infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, and you're probably mostly familiar with this, and this is where we're spinning up virtual machines in Azure where we can actually do a lot of those functions. Now, it's a virtual machine like any other virtual machines, which means you're responsible for patching, managing it, doing all those things for your customers in the past, but now it's up in a scalable environment. And the great thing about this, regardless of the size of your customer, whether you have one person, 3 people, 250 people, you're giving them enterprise class cloud services at a fraction of the cost they might be able to do things on-prem. I always like to throw this slide in around Gartner and where we are. The reason I bring this up, when you think about those 4 models, we're the only company that's in all 4. From an on-prem, which is the Magic Quadrant for virtualization, VMware is the incumbent, but from a technology perspective, we've really caught up to VMware from an on-prem virtualization. We also have IaaS and PaaS, and you'll notice that we're in the leader quadrant there. And then also in public storage services, we're in the leader quadrant there. So when you look at all the different cloud offerings that are out there in the world today, from Amazon to Rackspace, Microsoft's across all of them. So especially when you're talking about a hybrid connectivity, we really have those abilities to be forthright for your customers, but also we understand it. It's in our DNA, especially when we start talking about PaaS solutions. And I think it's interesting when you look at that magic quadrant for a second, and it might be hard to read, but in the upper right, that's Salesforce. And when you look at Salesforce, they really focus on CRM solutions, whereas our PaaS cloud is really bring your app, bring what you want to develop. And kind of a fun case study, part of this flexibility that you see across all these four magic quadrants was why the Winter Olympics was held up in Azure. So all the services that supported the Winter Olympics in Sochi this year were actually all done up in Azure, as opposed to Amazon or one of our competitors. So it's a very flexible pattern to bring your workloads to it. And lastly, one thing that's very important, especially when we talk about hybrid, our workloads are portable. You can put them up in our cloud and take them down from our cloud. You're not stuck. You're not stuck in one way or the other. You have the ability to choose both or one or the other. It's up to you. We're not going to have any proprietary languages. They're Windows servers for you. Especially when you look at our data center footprint, I just like to bring this one up very quick just to mention a couple things. We're all over the world, over 100 data centers now. I think we're in 149 different locations. The last slide, I know that number is probably wrong because it's probably changed as of a few minutes ago, I would imagine. I always like to mention that our cloud is larger. We're 6 times bigger than Google, 2 times bigger than Amazon. Now, the Amazon one's interesting because their data centers to date are a little bit larger than our data centers, but we're in twice as many locations as they are. So we're a worldwide infrastructure. More importantly, once again, regardless of the customers that you work with, this is what you can offer them. You can offer them a global infrastructure for a fraction of the cost, especially when you look at those environments. Looking at hybrid offerings, from a networking perspective, there are 2, and there's actually a third, but I hesitate to mention it here, and I'll mention it in just a second. But we have point-to-site connectivity. This is for virtual administration, for those developer on-off test and dev kind of environments. And then there's site-to-site, and that's where you really want to attach an on-prem data center. Maybe if you're a hosting partner, this is one way where you can extend your hosting platform to take advantage of Azure, where your customers will come through your doors and basically get sent out to Azure, where they're not going to Azure directly, but they're coming through you, which allows you to have all those wonderful managed services that you can offer. Site-to-site connectivity essentially allows you to connect to Azure, to connect you to one of those major data centers in the world. Point-to-site is designed for administration, but depending on what you're trying to do, it might be perfect for what you have to set up and administer inside of that environment. But understanding the key tenets here. There's one thing on this slide, and we just don't have time because I could spend an hour on this topic, is around virtual networking. When you think about setting up any data center, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, there is one thing you have to get right from the get-go and plan out really well, and that's the networking. Think about, imagine just trying to throw routers in place and cables in place and hope you got it right. Especially with IP addressing. When you start working with Azure or really any cloud service provider, make sure you have the networking planning in place so that when you start setting up all those solutions and workloads, they should just work, just like when we plug things into the network once we know the IP plan's in place. But some really, really cool stuff there. Some great guidance for when you're setting up. The one that I didn't mention, it's not on the slide, but it's definitely out there, and it's called ExpressRoute. Well, that's where you have a dedicated line into Azure, where you're either working with an exchange provider or a network service provider to actually give you access directly in. And it's a private line into Azure. The reason I hesitate to mention it, that depending on your customers that you're working with, and mainly the customers that Dennis and I work with, and the partners that we work with through you, the customers that we work through you as a partner, inside of there, generally the cost for ExpressRoute is something that's not anybody wants to take on, because it can be quite expensive, not only for the monthly charges, but depending on who you choose as a provider, they're going to have monthly charges. And then depending on what you have for an infrastructure or where you're physically located, there may be some additional hardware infrastructure you have to put in place. So ExpressRoute, it is an option, but it is a pricey option at that. It's a phenomenal option because then you can get into this, the 1 gigabit range of having direct connection to it. So it offers a lot of great benefits, but there is a cost associated with that. And actually, I put it on the bottom. I just didn't build out right away. But it's for everybody. It's just, once again, what's your budget and what can you do with that? Last couple things before we turn it over to Q&A. Just want to make you aware as a partner. Hopefully, you're aware of the solution accelerators. I like to think of the solution accelerators as an easy bake cake. Like you go to a store and you buy a cake mix. You think about building a cake. And when you think about IT solutions, that's what you're building for your customers. Well, depending on where you've come up, you might, I need, this is my grandma's recipe. I need, a smidge of this, a pinch of that, a little bit of flour, and there's no measurements, right? Have you ever seen some of your older relatives' recipe cards are just kind of like flour, egg, well, how much? And you come up with a cake, and every time you bake the cake, it's different. What solution accelerators do are that cake mix, where every time you build a cake, it's very consistent. They give you a nice platform, a nice roadmap to follow. And there's one specifically for hybrid networking to help you get connected inside of Azure. So you definitely want to check that out. I'll make sure I'll provide the links in the IM channel here in just a minute. And then lastly, I just like to bring this up because it is something that might be another way for hybrid working. So not only do we talk about hybrid network connectivity, which is what the Solution Accelerator talks about, there's also a Solution Accelerator around identity. And another way that a lot of your customers are digging into the cloud is by doing directory synchronization. And some of you already have done this with Office 365 and doing DirSync with an on-prem Active Directory environment. The great thing about this is that if you don't know that when you do that, Office 365's directory is Azure Active Directory. The great thing about this is that you now have those tenants inside of Azure Active Directory, which allows you to do a lot of additional solutions, especially from a sales opportunity. You can upsell into Azure Premium, which opens up all kinds of great things around multi-factor authentication, single sign-on for PaaS applications, and reporting. Now you're thinking, yeah, whoopee, there's actually a neat report called anonymous anomaly logins. In other words, I can detect that Dennis is logged in every morning at 8 a.m. from Seattle. Then all of a sudden on one day he logs in at 2 a.m. from Tahiti. Well, as much as Dennis wants to go to Tahiti, but I know he happens to not be on vacation, so it actually will flag up a report. Some really cool technologies you can take advantage of with that single identity. So all we wanted to do here was kind of give you a brief of kind of our thinking around when we think about hybrid, of where you can put those workloads, because now when you're moving servers, there's a choice. 5 years ago, it's how do you upgrade? Now it's where do we put that workload, that server we're going to upgrade? Do we migrate them off to Azure? Do we migrate them to 365? Or do we do an on-prem? Because that's what makes the most sense. So now it really lets you to have those kind of trusted advisor conversations. And as Dennis talked about, especially with SQL coming up soon from an end-of-life perspective, you can really have that full solution conversation with your customers and kind of take another level into that relationship with your customers. So with that, we're going to kind of stop and just pause for a minute and look for any questions that you have. So I think probably the best way, so we're not talking over each other, is probably just get those questions into IM that you may have. I believe that's kind of how to do it. Dennis, I think that's probably the best way, is IM, so that we're not chattering over each other.
Yeah, that sounds good. So really encourage any questions that you might have. This is really intended to be not so much a presentation, but kind of an office hours open conversation. So please either type in, or if you want to open your phone and verbally ask us a question, feel free to do that also.
I think we just stunned them into silence.
I guess so.
Sean Saylor, do you have any questions, updates, input for fellow partners?
No, I don't have any questions. I've bombarded the Microsoft team over the last 2 weeks enough, and I've got probably the majority of my questions answered, and you guys have been awesome on a daily basis. If I do have something related to Azure, you guys respond very quickly, and I just want to say thank you.
Welcome, Sean. Oh, where's the link to the Accelerator? Elaine, I got your question. Bear with me a second. So as other people have questions, I will dig up that link to the Solution Accelerator.
And we have another question. Can you provide, I was just about to read it, moved up. A second here. Looks like we have several questions coming in here. I don't know, Matt, if you might be able to address this. Can you provide some guidance regarding Store Simple in the Azure offering around that? I am not familiar. Matt, do you have any
Nope.
Are you familiar with that program by chance?
Yeah, I am. I will get, and I just found this solution accelerator. So Elaine, bear with me. I'll get into the area. Store Simple is an interesting solution from an Azure hybrid, especially from storage. What the Store Simple is, it's a device, and really the consideration here is how big the data that you have that's going to be coming up and down between the cloud, especially with hybrid solutions. So, for example, let's say you have SharePoint on-prem and you have SQL database, or maybe you're using a SQL VM or you're using SQL services that are up in Azure. How do you get that large? And maybe you're doing a lot of large data files. So, for example, there's a company a construction company, Rockport Construction, up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, that did this. But they were working with, if you think about the business model of a construction company for a second, they work with very, very large files, from the CAD and CAM diagrams themselves to all the media that goes into building a building. And they built things like Marriott's and museums and really big buildings. So you can imagine just all the blobs that were involved. And their solution was SharePoint. That was the app that they used to track construction projects. That app in and of itself is actually a really cool little case study of how they use SharePoint for that. But the problem they had is that their SharePoint database on-prem was over 300 gig, and every year the IT director for Rockport had to actually figure out how big the next year's SAN was going to be to solve the problem, because they had to use a lot of SAN optimization technologies to make the data really feasible. Because if you know anything about SharePoint, once you get past 100 gig, it becomes very chatty, and you really have to do a lot of database management to keep performance steady. And the IT director's solution here was a SAN. Well, they looked at Azure to move the solution, and what happens, they moved all the data up into Azure. They put a Store Simple device on-prem, and what a Store Simple device basically is, for those of you who've never heard of it, it's essentially a caching device for large files that allows us to kind of have cold and hot storage, and the Store Simple is basically talking directly to Azure to move bits and bytes between the cloud, and frequently used information is going to be cached. It does it all at the block level, so it's actually fairly efficient. So when people open a large document, even if it's not been cached yet, the Store Simple device is working on the behalf of giving that person all the data right away. So they have a 1 gig document, they're going to see page 1 pop up right away, and for all intents and purposes, the users will won't really see much performance. I mean, at the end of the day, you have a 1 gig file coming down a pipe into that device. So Store Simple helps mitigate all that. There's a lot of really good case studies out there. There's a lot of really good documentation. Traditionally, we don't see a lot of that in the SMB space because, once again, kind of like ExpressRoute, Store Simple does have some costs associated with it. But if you're working with those customers that have high-end data needs, that they want to use the cloud for maybe backup and storage and business continuity and business availability, that's something you want to definitely look at. Okay. So Dennis, I'll let you take some here while I'm digging up some links. Dennis, did we lose you?
Excuse me. Yes, I'm here. One question that came is how can I estimate charges for adding Azure service to an on-premise network? And I don't know if folks have gone on. There's the cost. There's an estimator tool on the Azure site that enables you to price out these solutions and be able to pick a variety of different components depending on what kind of solution you're trying to build out. So that's really how you can go about that. Matt, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on kind of pricing some of these out.
Yeah, the pricing calculators out there are probably the best choices for that, and the one you mentioned, the Azure Cost Estimator, is going to give you a general idea of what that is and how that works. So it's something you definitely want to check out. It's a free. It's kind of like a map tool if you're familiar with running map, but it does it specifically looking for workloads, moving them up into Azure, and it'll give you a general idea of what that cost is going to be.
And another question that came in, can you expand a little more on kind of the hybrid configuration tools, like, quote unquote, the recipe, is there any specific materials that we can share? I think those solution accelerators are definitely, a good way to kind of, templatize and get some pre-configured information. I don't know, Matt, are there any other, thoughts you have on expanding that information?
Yeah, there actually is. There's a
Around
couple
how-
resources, and one is the one that my team has worked on, and it's the Azure in 5-minute videos, and I just pushed the main link there that allows you to actually go up, and you can actually go to Azure .msts2.com as well as a good link for you to use. And what that does is it allows us to share with you a bunch of videos that me and my team have done about Azure, and there's lots of different topics, and specifically there's a couple on the solution. There's one on the solution accelerator, there's one on business continuity, and how to actually get into it. So specifically, Elaine, back to your very first question, here's a link where you can learn more about the hybrid solution accelerator, as well as links to where you actually get that guidance. We do have most of that stuff up there for you to look at, so you want to be aware of the different types of accelerators to help you out. There's one identity specifically, so there's a lot of areas where we give you kind of that guidance to help you get into that information. And a lot of it's up on the ready-to-go marketing site. So as a partner, hopefully you're familiar with that site. And then here is, even though it's kind of a long link, I will copy the short link to you as well. So I'll put both I'll put both those links up inside of it. Something you definitely want to get into. All right. Any other questions? I think
we have one around a deployment, a failover solution to an on-premise network, and that is definitely a very common kind of first. A very common solution that we're seeing in SMB is disaster backup and recovery, and leveraging Azure as a backup storage tool. I don't know, and Matt, did you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, there actually is well, that's one area that is really growing, and it's an excellent question. And in that 5-minute video link that I sent out to everybody, you want to look at the section for Azure Site Recovery. So we just stood up Azure Site Recovery, which allows us to do failover of virtual machines on-prem to the cloud. So if you're looking at virtualization solutions, ASR is great, and we'll even do VMware as well as Hyper-V Gen 2. Now, for those of you who know Azure, we don't support Gen 2 in Azure as of yet. It definitely is on the roadmap, but what will happen is when we bring up that VMware or that Gen 2 Hyper-V image, ASR will convert it on the fly as it's being uploaded into our data center. So if the on-prem virtual machine goes down, Azure will actually take over, and then when you bring it back up, it's kind of, you're basically using Azure to help do that site recovery. Backup in and of itself has also been greatly improved. We're doing a lot of things. You can actually back up the Azure instances inside the cloud themselves now. We can actually back up from local clients, Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows Server 2012 and above, can actually back up directly in System Center Data Protection Manager 2012, if by chance you happen to be using any of the System Center products, can be backed up directly into Azure as well. So the backup story is really, really good, and a lot of those are up in that Azure 5-minute video series. Those are some of the quick hitters we put up, very popular topics.
Okay, there's a very more specific question. I have a customer who's chosen not to give up authority to Active Directory by setting up a DirSync. He said that configuration gives them a better disaster recovery capability. Wouldn't it be easier for them to manage users from the Office 365 Admin Center or perhaps AAD? Of course, there's costs associated for the premium, but wouldn't it provide a much more secure and recovery environment in case there is a disaster? Any input on that one, Matt?
I'm not sure I'm following the first question that they have. So they are James, this is a good question. Are they actually using DirSync or not? Because it sounds like they're not. So I'm trying to figure out, are we trying to help you sell that solution, or are you struggling with it? I'm a little confused by the question that's there. It is easier to manage. Go ahead.
I was going to say, if maybe we can take that offline and get a little more on that one. We can make sure you get with your PSE or your partner technology strategist
Yeah, James, because there's a little more question there, because you're right. I mean, depending on what they want to do, if they're not doing DirSync, then that's where I'm kind of confused. There's not going to be anything in the cloud. But James, my email address and Dennis's email address is on that first slide you should be looking at. So feel free to, if you want to give us a little more detail, kind of what you're looking for, because I'm a little confused of what we have. I think it is easier to manage just the user objects in Office 365 or Azure. But remember, the directory that's up there is not Active Directory, as you know, that what's on-prem. It is a different directory solution for identities. It doesn't have a schema. It doesn't do other things. So I think it might be one of those things we want to talk about, why the customer hasn't chosen, or what concerns do they have about using the DirSync tool would be kind of where I would tackle that, because that's going to be the better solution down the road for them. And it's a very highly secure solution as well. But I understand what the concern is, but I'd like to know more about it. So James, feel free to email me or Dennis. And with that, I know this is just a quick hitter that we have today, and we're at the bottom of the hour, and it looks like we got most of the questions. And on behalf of myself, I want to say thank you. I know one of our teammates, Rhonda, was hanging out with us as well, so thank you, Rhonda, for joining with us today. And then, Dennis, do you have anything to close and say? And then I'll stop the recording and we'll call it a day.
Yeah, you have our email addresses. I know this is you probably have this conversation probably spurred more questions. We're trying to expose some information, and then make sure you're getting the support with your partner sales exec, and we'd be happy to take questions offline. So if you feel your question is not answered, send it over to myself or Matt, and we'll get you connected with your appropriate Microsoft team and get your questions answered for you. So great opportunity with setting up hybrid and leveraging Azure, and we really appreciate everyone's time.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now, and I'll wish everybody have a great day. And once again, feel free to reach out to us on this side. Have a good afternoon.
Okay, thanks.